So we're gonna prepare our rig for our animation. First thing I'm gonna do is swap my workspace to rigging over here. And then I'm gonna put a front-facing camera so that I can set up my bones over here. So go to Artographic, front, and I'm also going to turn on the wireframe mode so I know where I'm positioning these. The positioning of my joints is gonna be really important because this is where it's actually going to deform later on. And I also have to make sure that my model has some essential loops that will allow it to later bend like I need it to. Bare minimum, you're gonna need at least 3 loops around the area you wish to bend. In the case of the neck of our bowling pin, right? I have 3 loops here, 3 loops around the body. Again, bare minimum. You could have a little bit more, but I would recommend at least 3 loops around that specific area. So now that I have that checked, again, I'm just gonna do this for safety's sake. I'm gonna make sure my transformations are set to 0. I'm gonna make sure I have no history, and it's very important that I do this step before I bind my bones to my geometry. Once I do this, I cannot delete the history. So make sure that you have no history in your geometry, just in case you do need to delete it. If you do delete it once you have your bones binded, it will delete the binding. You would have to rebind, and it's gonna break other things. So make sure you do this before you even start creating your bones. So by going over to, right, I'm in the rigging workspace. Go to skeleton, create joints. And what this is gonna let me do, now if I click on specific areas, but if I hold X, it'll snap to my grid. And then I can click again. And I'm starting from the bottom up because that's gonna be the order of my hierarchy. The base is gonna be the most important bone that controls the entirety of my skeleton. And the top of the chain is only going to control the very top of the head. So if you hold shift, it'll snap. It's gonna place that right around the middle here. I'm gonna add 2 bones relatively close to each other. This is gonna be the base of the neck. And then the neck itself right around here. This is gonna allow me to rotate the neck from here and then rotate the head independently. And then lastly, 1 more for the very top of the head so then I can bind the head to this specific bone later on. You can press enter, and that's gonna create your hierarchy. You're gonna see here that you have your joints, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 5 for the top. We're gonna make sure to name these. This is gonna be really important. Just for organization, we have to make sure that we name our specific pieces that we're working with. We're going to be working with geometry, we're going to be working with joints, we're going to be working with controls. So for the sake of organization, it's always really important to make sure that you have them named. So in the case of my pin, I'm not going to name it P cylinder, obviously. It's going to be pin underscore geo for geometry. And over here, I'm going to make sure I name these independently as well. The advantage of this is that we have a search function. So in the event that we have a more complex rig, we can literally search up specific parts that we would need to tackle independently. So our first rig, we can name it our base, we can name it our center of gravity if it's a character, and I always use the underscore JT suffix to specify that it's a joint, right? Then we have our middle or abdomen joint, JT. We have the base of the neck underscore JT. You have the neck itself underscore JT, and then we have the top of the head or head underscore JT. Now I can basically select these and move them around. Right now they're not connected to the actual pin. You can kind of see already the logic of how this works. I can select any of these points and it'll influence later down the hierarchy. Now to actually connect my skeleton to my geometry, I select both of them and then I go into skin, bind skin, and then over in my settings, right, I click the little box to open the settings. I'm gonna change the bind method over here. Make sure it's set to geodesic. Now, skinning is definitely a more complex process, especially for characters. In our case, we can get away with a geodesic voxel binding method because it's just going to pick the closest geometry and then do sort of a good job at binding into the skeleton. Trust me, weight painting can be its own course. So we're just going to limit it to geodesic voxel. And then we're going to click apply and close. And now, right, you can turn on the solid view. And over here is the basically x-ray for the joints. So now I can see that over there like that. Now notice whenever I rotate this specific area, it follows, right? Now we can actually start moving our pin and start doing some animations. However, this is not efficient for animation, animating the pin itself, the joints themselves, I mean. We're going to be creating some controls with some nerve curves. Now, the advantage of using nerve curves is that they don't render in animation. We can hide them independently from the mesh later on. So, if we go over to surface, we're going to add a nerve circle. Right, and then I'm going to scale this up. This is going to be my main controller. Make this a little bit bigger. And right now I'm just going to duplicate them. I'm going to do this basically all at once. I'm going to duplicate my controls. And then this is my main control. This is going to be the control for the base. And then I'm going to duplicate this a few more times for each, basically for each joint except the head, unless you wanted to do something like move this area independently. But as you can see, this is mainly just to have that bind to the head itself. You might not actually move this joint at any point. You're mainly going to be rotating or moving from this region over here, right? So, going to go over to front view. I already had my nerve circle 2 selected. I'm going to press Control D, and then I'm going to hold V to snap to vertex. And I'm going to make sure that they're snapped to the bone itself, to the actual joint. So duplicate that one more time, hold the V, snap, duplicate one more time, V, and then snap. Basically now I have these joints, these controls. Right now by themselves they're not going to do much. So I'm going to go ahead and freeze transform for all of them. I selected them all at once so that now whenever I move this, if I want it to return to its original position, I can just zero this out and it'll essentially fix my orientation again, right? So to actually combine my bones to my controls, I have to select, I'm going to be using a constraint method where this is sort of different from parenting, and constraints can be turned on and off depending on the situation. They're a bit messy, but again, for the sakes of this exercise, we're going to be using this approach. So the way this works, I'm going to select what's driving my movement, the driver, and then what is being driven by it. In this case, it's going to be the parent and then the child. And over here in constraints, I'm going to add this parent constraint over here. And I'm also going to make sure in the settings that it maintains its offset. If this is off, it might break the position of the joint. So make sure that this is checked, right? And then we apply that or add. Now what this does is whenever I rotate the control, much like a regular parent, it moves the joint. So now I don't have to select the joint itself because it's going to be awkward to select because we have the geometry in the way. And we want to see the geometry to actually see the deformation and how it's working. So the control is just that again, that just accessibility that I now have to work with, right? And then I'm going to repeat this process. Something I forgot to do, very important, I didn't name my controls. So I'm going to do that before I keep going. This is going to be my master control underscore CT, right, for control. This is the bottom or base control underscore CT. The middle underscore CT. The base neck underscore CT. And then the neck itself underscore CT. There we go. That's an organized. So now we keep going. Select the control, what's driving it, or what it's going to be driving. constraint, parent, select, and I can press G, which repeats my last step. So right now the constraint is my last step, so I can just select the control of the joint. I press G to repeat it. I do the same over here. G. Now these are all constrained. Basically now I can do these motions over here. You're gonna notice something's kind of broken, right? Because right now the hierarchy is going to be the constraint, not the parenting between the joints. So now I have to parent the controls to each other so that now when I rotate something, the entire chain behaves like it did at the beginning. So again, in this case, we go from child to parent, and then we go press P. Child, parent, P. Child, parent, P. And then one more time. There we go. Now whenever we rotate this, now it's behaving how we would expect. Now I can turn off the X-ray of the joints. I can even hide the joints at this point. Just select the whole hierarchy and press H. And this is essentially what I'm left with, right? These basic controls. And then if I want to move everything, right, I can select the base, or I select the master control and then move everything around. I can also move this independently from it. We can also add some other extra features like squash and stretch, but we're gonna keep it basic for now. What I'm missing, lastly, is just going into selecting everything and then putting this into a group. So I can select everything from the geometry to my joints to my controls. Press Control G to group. Oh, actually, you know, I'm glad I recorded this because this is actually not how you would want to do it. Basically what ended up happening, a group is essentially like parenting. You're throwing everything you select into that parent. So instead of doing everything like that, I'm just gonna select my geometry, group that, and then name this pin underscore GP for group. And instead of parenting the way I did, I'm just gonna hover over my selection and then with middle mouse, just drag that into the group. And that way I don't break the hierarchy, or I don't break my connections that I had later on, right? There we go. So that's essentially it for the rig. Now you guys can do some basic movements, rotations. Also, the approach that we worked on is known as a forward kinematic setup. Forward kinematic is rotation based. Essentially, everything's being driven from the top of the hierarchy all the way to the end of it. And in this case, we go from bottom to top, right? So this goes first, and then this goes next, and so on and so forth. That's what's known as a forward kinematic rig, and it mainly works with rotations. The other one, which is inverse kinematics, we don't have to tackle that for now, but I can show you guys some examples later on, right? That should be it for the rigging segment. We can start animating soon enough.